The city of Nottingham has been shaken by the killing of 3 of its residents. In the early hours of Tuesday morning, a man with a knife stabbed 2 Nottingham University students returning from an end-of-term night out. Barnaby Webber was just 19 years old and finishing his first year as a history student, described by his family as a beautiful, brilliant, bright young man with everything in life to look forward to. He was a keen cricketer who'd just made the university team. Grace Kumar was also only 19 years old. She was a talented hockey player who'd competed in England's under-18s squad. Studying medicine at Nottingham, her family described her as an adored daughter and sister. They said she was a truly wonderful and beautiful young woman. Sometime after those senseless crimes, the alleged perpetrator attacked another man in his 60s, killing him as well. Ian Coates was the caretaker of Huntington Academy, whose head teacher described him as, quote, a much-loved colleague who always went the extra mile for the benefit of our children and will be greatly missed. After stabbing Mr. Coates, the alleged perpetrator stole his van before running over another 3 people. Those 3 are being treated for their injuries in hospital. 1 is in a critical condition. Naturally, the community is in shock. More than 2,000 people have attended a vigil at the University of Nottingham. They laid flowers and held a minute's silence for the victims. Shortly after the attacks, a suspect was arrested on suspicion of murder. He hasn't been named, but he's understood to be 31 years old and originally from West Africa. Official sources confirmed to the BBC that he has settled status after living in the UK since his teens. The BBC also reports that he has no criminal record and was not known to the security services, but that he did have a history of mental illness. The police investigation is still ongoing. Now, it looks like a terrible and tragic event. Normally, we wouldn't report on stories like this because, horrific as they are, they generally aren't particularly political. And it's important not to speculate while the facts are still unclear as to what exactly has gone on here. That's, in fact, a sentiment that Home Secretary Suella Braverman appeared to agree with when she gave this statement to the House of Commons.
I'm being kept fully informed by law enforcement on the ground and receiving regular updates. Mr. Speaker, the House will appreciate the critical importance of following due process at all times. It's completely natural to seek answers immediately when something terrible happens, but it's also vital that those answers are wholly accurate. Speculating out loud is never helpful and runs the risk of being counterproductive. The police have asked for patience while the inquiries continue, Mr. Speaker.
Unfortunately, someone who didn't get Braverman's memo is her colleague Ben Bradley. He's Tory MP for Mansfield, so that's near Nottingham. The reason I say this is because hours earlier, he'd been busy giving an interview to Talk TV's Julia Hartley-Brewer. That's when he made these grim events political.
Many people are making the point that as soon as it's sort of not ruled out completely, but it's thought to be not terrorism, the attention seems to go away. Mental health problem, foreign national, oh well, nothing to see here. That's just not how most British people see it.
No, I don't think it will be. I mean, the first thing I'll say, of course, is it's absolutely devastating for the city and the residents of Nottinghamshire who, feel and felt like Nottingham was a safe place to be, is a warm, welcoming place. And it is a worry, as you've just described, and, particularly a huge student population in Nottingham, lots of parents with children living away from home for the first time and all of those challenges. So it's been an awful 24 hours. The city's come together, the community's come together. There were vigils and kind of people putting their arms around each other last night, really, and hopefully I'm sure that will continue for the next coming days, and we'll try to recover and support people. But it is a fair point, and you won't be surprised at my view, Julia, that being in Britain is a privilege, not a right, and that actually if that is abused, then you shouldn't be here. Now, that is an important conversation. I agree with a lot of frustrations that have been raised. I do think that if you're not a British citizen, you commit particularly violent crimes in this country, you shouldn't be here. Yeah. I also think that's an important debate for us to have away from the heat of this particular circumstance.
So he says it's an important debate to have away from the heat of these circumstances after, intimating towards it on national radio. And then Bradley didn't let the heat of these particular circumstances stop him going further.
A lot of people will say, look, we can be very sympathetic and someone may have issues, but there's also an argument where, look, we've got enough criminals of our own. We've got enough terrorists of our own. We've got enough people with serious mental illness who could be a risk to people. Although, by the way, lots of people are also getting in touch pointing out that the vast majority of people with mental illness are not a risk to anybody at all, and perhaps more risk to themselves than certainly anybody else. We need to make that clear. But We don't need to import people. And once someone we discover is someone who is a potential threat to other people with a history of violence, why are they still in this country, people would be asking.
And it's a very fair and right question. I think, as I say, if you're not a British citizen, being allowed to live in this country is a privilege and not a right. And I do think that the first duty of governments, of anybody in that space, is to protect British citizens first and foremost. We have that debate on a regular basis around migration at the minute. There's no indication that this chap was not meant to be here or not allowed to be here in the first instance. He's had a legal right to stay. But I do think that if you are convicted of violent crimes, then you should be removed, full stop. As you say, it shouldn't be for us to have to pay for other people's criminals from other countries, quite frankly. Yeah. But it does pose a risk. I also think, though, that in the immediate aftermath of this particular event, the most important thing in this 24-hour period and over the coming days is to allow people to grieve, to allow communities to try and knit some of this back together. And from my point of view, my role in this is to try and support people to get their heads around this and to feel okay.
Now, as I say, we don't know all the circumstances of this case. It's obviously a live police investigation, so we don't want to speculate too much. But from what's been reported, this man who's committed this heinous, terrible crime didn't have a history of violent crimes, right? So if he did, then what Ben Bradley was arguing there might have some relevance. But no, all we've told is that he had a history of mental health problems. What does he want to do? Deport people because they've got mental health problems? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, if he's arguing that if this person gets convicted, he should be deported, okay, who knows? But that doesn't stop the tragedy. Right. And so what he seems to be intimating towards is if only we deported more people when they'd had histories of violent crime, this wouldn't happen. But that's not the case here because this guy didn't have a history of violent crime. James, I mean, obviously tragic circumstances. And I found that quite a sort of distasteful and awful conversation between Julie Hartley-Brewer and the Tory MP.
Yeah, it's appalling circumstances and actually, I mean, rare occasion, I suppose. But I mean, I thought what Suella Braverman was completely appropriate in terms of responding to it and what you'd expect the Home Secretary to say in response to something like this. What you've just shown in that clip was something else again. And you could see, actually, Ben Bradshaw, that he'd kind of respond to a prompt from Julie Hartley-Brewer about the situation with some sort of smear, really. Let's call it that, a kind of smear against migrants in Britain. Then immediately sort of backtrack and say, oh, well, actually, really, we have to keep away from speculating and in this emotional moment, and then go straight back onto the smear again. So presumably in his head, he realised that what he was doing was kind of out of order, and that is out of order here. The other bit to throw in, by the way, is that there's a sort of, I mean, this is just stepping back from the immediate situation a bit, which is probably not a bad idea, is that there is a kind of right-wing ecosystem out there that starts to generate this kind of conversation. So, okay, the Home Secretary says this thing, and I think it was appropriate and respectful, and it kind of recognises an ongoing investigation that speculation is bad. You then get onto talk radio where that kind of falls by the wayside. There's quite a lot of speculation. That then feeds into what a whole load of people, and you can see it online, who've been given a bit of a license to jump around on this by things like what you just saw on talk radio, who have absolutely no compunction whatsoever about saying some really, really appalling things. And you can see how that starts to impact on wider politics here, that you end up with a conversation that is anything like this is completely inappropriate. And it's not something that a sitting MP from a party where the Home Secretary has basically said the right thing about no speculation, respect, the people are grieving. This is a horrible, horrible tragedy and a crime that's happened. No respect for that whatsoever, and instead just feeding into this peculiar sort of ecosystem of different bits of the right feeding off each other and coming out with more and more horrible conclusions.